Hello, everyone. This is Enamul Haq with Philip Shaw from Canada, and I am from Bangladesh. This week, we are talking about an unusual event that normally we didn't discuss so far in our episodes. But this is about the ongoing strain, or I would say conflicting relationship that is happening between Canada and India, and also between recently it has surfaced with the United States. Just to give you a brief summary on it. On September 1st, if I remember correctly, Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister of Canada, mentioned in their parliament that when Indian diplomat is involved in terms of killing a particular Sikh separatist leader who is a citizen, Canadian citizen, and it created diplomatic row between India and Canada. And eventually, just to cut the story short, eventually Canadians, diplomats were asked to leave India. The visa relationship was halted, which has been renewed now, which is now, at least the Canadian visa has been given. Indians has been giving visa to Canadians so far. But as recently as November 29, there has been another report which is vaguely linked to the same event or similar event, that there was another event by an Indian, they didn't say Indian agent, they said it was Indian nationals, and an Indian national was involved in a paid killing of a Sikh separatist leader who is a citizen of the United States and probably also in Canada. And the killing did not happen. And according to the U.S. Judicial Department of Justice, they have provided the picture of the money transaction that has happened, $15,000 out of $100,000 contract killing. And according to the report that we have seen, they have also mentioned that the contracted person was actually undercover U.S. agent. So given this particular scenario, the US government raised it. And if I remember the news properly, the person who is an Indian businessman, all you can say they have accused is a drug dealer and weapon trader internationally. He was apprehended in Czechoslovakia and waiting for extradition to extraditing to US. So as of now, this is the story. Indian government, according to the report that we have seen, as also on BBC, has rejected this. They do not want to say they were involved in any of this. They are saying that they have also started a high-power investigation team to investigate on this matter. The reason we thought this would be discussed, because the news came to me from the Western media as a biggest surprise. So let me put this thing to Phil and see what is the event that he has seen from living in Canada, because he's closer to both US border and living in Canada. So Phil.
Thank you very much, Enamul. Philip Shaw coming to you from Dresden, Ontario. But Dr. Haq has documented exactly what happened quite well. From a Western perspective, when Justin Trudeau announced this in the House of Parliament here in Canada, one reason he announced it is because the press had this story in Canada and they were going to release it. So I think he was put in a bad situation and he just decided to release it publicly. And I don't think the Indian government had much warning of that. And subsequently, you've heard Dr. Haq talk about the US indictment of this other Indian national that was thinking of assassinating this somebody that purports to support Sikh separatism in the United States, who is a dual Canadian citizen. But what happened after that was, from a Canadian perspective, it was looked at as outrageous that a foreign government would actually target a Canadian citizen on Canadian soil. And at the time, and it's still true today, like the Indian government really treated the Canadian accusation in a really offensive way, and they reacted very aggressively against Canada at that time to have the temerity of accusing the Indian government of even thinking about doing that. It is interesting. There's a large Sikh diaspora in Canada, And there's a very small minority of that believe in Khalistan as a separate state for the Sikh homeland in India. And the Indian government over the years has accused Canada of supporting terrorism because of these people living in Canada. And so, there's a long history to this. And then even before that, we had the largest mass murder in Canadian history in 1985 when the Air India bombing was happened over the Atlantic Ocean. I think over 300 people died, mostly Canadian of Indian extraction. So there's a long history of this. But with regard to what happened, I cannot emphasize enough how much I guess you could call it shock that the Canadian government thought that a foreign government, especially India, who we considered a very strong and friendly ally with lots of immigration. In fact, I think there's more immigration from India than there is anywhere else in Canada and so there was a lot of shock that way. But of course, the other thing that happened with this American indictment, the Indian government is treating this much differently than they are the Canadian experience when it first happened. And I think it's, largely because this is the United States and there's lots of back channel going on. They're the largest economy in the world with the biggest military. And, it just gets to be a long story. But if you think about it, like I know myself, when I first heard about it, I thought, oh my goodness, there's going to be, how could another government actually take out a Canadian on Canadian soil? But if you think about it, from a Western perspective or on the other side of the world, this happens all the time. When you think about it, we're Western governments, like you think about our American friends, intelligence agencies that have taken people out in other countries. I can think of Soleimani from Iran, and I can think about lots of people in Afghanistan. Some are famous and some aren't so famous that have been assassinated on their own soil. And I've had actually some people here in Canada that said we really shouldn't be shocked too much about this because this goes on all the time. And in other countries, from a Western perspective, Western governments have done similar things. So what's the truth in the situation? Well, I suppose it's from a Western and Eastern perspective, it's a little bit different. But like I say, this goes on all the time. And I'll throw it back to you, Dr. Hawk.
Thank you. No, I think, I agree with you. This has been going on all the time, and the media, particularly when it happened to countries like on the eastern side, Iran, you have talked about Soleimani case. Osama bin Laden, who was not a Pakistani citizen, but was in refuge in Pakistan, was killed similarly. These are the cases that we know, if you think through. But there are many other cases. There are many other cases which happened. Even many heads of governments were accused to be killed with collaboration of agents from the United States. So this kind of events has been happening. Nothing that we could agree that this kind of killing is good. But the reason that I thought that this is an interesting one, because probably the West has never seen that it will happen in their own soil. So that is the biggest shock. But it has been happening here, and not that the same way that you and I are shocked. We were also shocked that someone in the Western countries, in the name of whatever political differences, would come to a country like Bangladesh and kill someone. And this is a bad, move globally, I would say, in that way, because that is something for us to think about it. Because if that's happened, then people would not find a refuge anywhere in the world. There are people who are hiding, who are trying to get out of their countries because of oppression and other reasons. There are also people, like I know the Canadian case, there is a accused murderer, or in fact convicted murderer of Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, Bangladesh, founder of Bangladesh. And in his case, there are murderers. I think it surfaced a month ago on CBC Canada that he is living in Canada nicely and happily. And Canadian government do not want to send them back, obviously for good reason, because they don't want to send back anyone for the death sentence. So I understand that, but question that I'm feeling that strongly, which is people on both sides of the border should recognize that these are probably the worst way of dealing with dissents. These are the worst way of dealing with people whom we do not like or who are probably violating the laws in some way. There are also similar things. If you look at the Palestinian leader, Yasser Arafat could have been killed by similarly. And there is also happening in Myanmar. And the other thing that is important is that the foreign agents using criminals or even gangs to kill others is probably not a new thing. It is everywhere it is happening. And I
You think about South America or Central America, like there's a tremendous history of involvement from other countries.
Exactly.
Political assassination and things like this. And you've also told me through the years when we talk about, well, even domestic issues in Bangladesh, but there's other issues in other countries where different intelligence services are at work.
I think everywhere. If you look at Chinese, they're working on it. Russians are working on it. Americans are working on it. So far, it was mostly West was doing it because of the economic supremacy. But what increasingly you are going to see, and this is probably the beginning, that you will see others are going the similar steps. So either we have to come up with an international agreement on certain things not to happen. And I think that, good governments around the world would take steps and say, this is not the way to deal with it. Otherwise, these surprises will never remain as a surprise, because I think this will happen. And every government around the world with their intelligence, if they're powerful and if they can tackle the retaliation of another powerful government, they will do it. So if you think about Canada, India, the reaction of Canada, India versus Canada, US are not India, US is not same. In Indian case, particularly the US case, the Indian government immediately said, we're going to investigate. We are not interested in participating on this. Whereas in Canadian case, even the trade talk between India and Canada was halted. So you can see the reaction is also different based on the power base of the countries.
There's no question about that. And what I think is what will be interesting to see, it's not over yet. And we'll see how this ends up, because the Indian government has had a tremendously different tact with regard to the American government for, somewhat obvious reasons. From a Canadian perspective, it was tough to see the Indian government treating Canada the way it did, but because there's a tremendous relationship with people crossing across the border between India and Canada all the time. But it will be interesting to see how it ends up with the United States, because even the Americans don't want this to upset the apple cart with India, because India, is the largest country in the world now with a growing economy. The rest of the story. They consider it a counterweight to China, which is important to them. So will this just be swept under the rug? I don't know, but it will be interesting to see how it ends up, especially with the United States.
I think you are right on that, because we don't know how the US is going to deal with it. They have been very careful. They knew it from the June, but they did not talk about it. For some reason, in November 29, they have raised it with the Justice Department, or at least they have started indicting. So to me, you realize that these were known event, and it was hidden for about 5 months there before they have done anything. So, and probably it is also maybe, and this is my thinking is that there may be other negotiations going on between India and US, particularly Chinese front is important. Or I'm not sure whether because of the Xi's visit to United States, things have changed. So I'm not sure which one has happened. It's a global politics, but these are the issues, at least in the minds of the people around us. And I thought that this would be interesting discussion for East-West.
It will be, and it is, and we'll see in the next few weeks how it changes. But from a Canadian perspective, the American indictment, it did change the game a little bit here. So we'll see what happens as we move ahead.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Phil, on this. And thank you, everyone, for listening to this. Remember, this episode is also going to be available on rumble.com.